No one was born expecting to kneel on cold marble before a stranger who could decide their future in a single breath. Yet that was exactly where Eleanor Ashford found herself on a gray November morning in the year 1892, her knees aching, her hands trembling, and her fate rolling slowly across the floor in the shape of a golden coin. People often say that destiny announces itself with storms and thunder. Eleanor's did not. It came quietly, almost politely, with the soft ringing sound of metal touching stone inside the great hall of Ashworth Manor. The coin rolled, caught the pale light from tall windows, and stopped as if it knew it was being watched. Every eye in the room followed it. Every breath paused. Eleanor stood among 5 other young women, all dressed in identical black dresses with white aprons and caps. They were new maids, summoned to their first inspection. But Eleanor was not who she appeared to be. She was not born to service. She was born Eleanor Ashford, daughter of Viscount Robert Ashford of Hertfordshire, or at least she had been before everything fell apart. She had been raised among music and books, taught piano before she was 10, taught Latin before she was 7. Her father had believed deeply in education. He told her often that a woman's mind was her strongest weapon and that she should sharpen it well. Eleanor believed him with her whole heart. She believed everything he told her until the night he died. His death did not come alone. It came with letters, angry men, and hard truths that shattered her world, piece by piece. Creditors arrived first, then lawyers, then the shameful truth that her father had lived a double life. He had gambled away their fortune in secret rooms across Boston and New York. He had borrowed from dangerous men. He had sold heirlooms that had been in the family for generations. Even Eleanor's mother's jewelry was gone. Worst of all, there had been no dowry. There had not been one for years. The polite visitors who once filled their home vanished overnight. Invitations stopped coming. Doors closed. When the last creditor took what remained of the estate, Eleanor was left with nothing but her clothes and a name that had become a burden instead of a blessing. She was 19 years old and alone. No family would claim her. No friends dared to be seen with her. The world had no place for a fallen woman of gentle birth. Pride was all she had left, and even that was something she could no longer afford. It was Miss Blackwood, an older housekeeper in a modest Boston home, who finally showed her mercy. She had known Eleanor's mother long ago and offered her bread, warmth, and honesty. She told Eleanor that a great estate in the countryside was hiring maids. The pay was fair. The house was strict. The master was cold, but just. The Duke of Ashworth, she warned, was not a kind man. Eleanor listened and made a choice that changed everything. She lied for the first time in her life. She became Eleanor Smith, orphan daughter of a country preacher seeking honest work. The lie tasted bitter, but it kept her alive. 3 days later, she arrived at Ashworth Manor. The house rose from the mist like something alive. Massive stone walls, tall towers, endless windows glowing with candlelight. It was not just large. It was overwhelming. Eleanor had seen fine homes before in her old life, but this was different. This was power made of stone. They entered through the servants' door and met Mrs. Hartley, the housekeeper. She was tall, thin, sharp-eyed, and silent as she inspected each girl. When she reached Eleanor, her gaze lingered. Eleanor knew her posture betrayed her. Breeding was difficult to hide, but Mrs. Hartley said nothing and moved on. That night, Eleanor lay awake in the narrow servants' room under the roof, listening to the house breathe and settle. She promised herself she would survive. She would work harder than anyone. She would never be noticed. The promise lasted less than 24 hours. On their first morning, the maids were summoned to the great hall. The space was enormous, cold, and lined with portraits of stern ancestors who seemed to judge them all. A fire burned far away, offering little warmth. Then he entered. The Duke of Ashworth did not announce himself. He did not look at them. His boots struck the marble floor with calm authority. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and impossibly still. His dark hair was neatly kept, his face strong and severe. But it was his eyes that unsettled Eleanor most. They were gray, empty, as if something inside him had burned out long ago. Mrs. Pratt Hartley began explaining rules and duties, but Eleanor barely heard her. The Duke stood near the fire, silent, watching. Then it happened. The coin fell. It slipped from his pocket, struck the floor, and rolled into the center of the room. No one moved. Fear froze the air. Everyone understood the danger. To touch it could mean ruin. To ignore it might be safest. Eleanor watched the other girls. One looked away. Another clenched her hands. The oldest maid stared at the floor. No one dared move, but Eleanor did. She did not fully understand why. Perhaps it was how tired she was of hiding. Perhaps it was her father's voice echoing in her mind. Perhaps it was anger at being tested like an animal. She stepped forward. Her footsteps echoed. She felt the Duke's gaze on her like weight. She knelt, picked up the coin, and felt its warmth in her palm. Then she stood and walked to him. She held it out. "Sir," she said calmly, "you dropped this." For a long moment, the Duke said nothing. Then he took the coin. His fingers brushed her skin, and something sharp and unexpected passed through her. "What is your name?" he asked. "Eleanor Smith," she replied. He studied her face carefully. "You are not what you appear to be," he said quietly. Eleanor met his gaze. "I am what I need to be." Something shifted in his eyes. He nodded once and turned away. Later that night, the servants whispered. The coin had been a test. No one had ever returned it before. The Duke noticed Eleanor after that. He never spoke to her, but she felt his eyes everywhere. Days later, Mrs. Hartley summoned her and assigned her to the library, the Duke's private domain. Eleanor knew then that invisibility was no longer possible. Something had begun the moment that coin touched her hand. And it was only the beginning. The library became the quiet center of Eleanor's world. Each morning she arrived at 9, just as ordered, carrying her cloth and brush, her heart steady but alert. At first, the Duke said little. He sat by the tall windows with books spread across his desk, reading or writing in silence while Eleanor worked among the shelves. The room was so vast it swallowed sound, yet she felt his presence everywhere, like a held breath. Slowly, the silence changed. He began asking small questions. Nothing dangerous at first, where she learned to read, whether she liked history or poetry, what books she recognized. Eleanor answered carefully, choosing words that revealed intelligence but not origin. Still, he noticed. He always noticed. One morning, while dusting a high shelf, she reached for a volume and paused without thinking. "This edition is rare," she said softly. "The binding was popular only for a short time." The Duke looked up sharply. "You recognize it?" he said. She lowered her eyes. "My father kept books. Most parsons do not," he replied. That was the day he asked her to sit. It felt wrong to lower herself into a leather chair meant for nobility, but his voice allowed no refusal. He studied her closely, not with suspicion now, but with something deeper. Curiosity mixed with weariness. "You live behind walls," he said at last. "Just as I do." The truth pressed hard against Eleanor's ribs. She could have continued the lie. It would have been safer. But safety had brought her nothing but loss. She told him, not all at once, not with drama, just facts, a fallen family, a ruined name, a young woman forced to disappear, to survive. When she finished, the Duke said nothing for a long time. Then he nodded. "You may keep your secret," he said. "This house has enough ghosts." From that day on, something shifted. Their conversations grew longer. He spoke of land and duty, of expectations placed on him before he was old enough to choose. He spoke of his late wife, carefully at first, then with honesty that surprised even him. A marriage formed from hope and broken by distance. a woman who faded while standing beside him, a death that left him hollow and blamed. Eleanor listened. She did not judge. She did not excuse. She simply listened, and that alone seemed to ease him. The bond between them deepened quietly. No touching. No promises. Just shared hours and truth spoken without fear. Until Lady Margaret arrived, the Duke's sister entered Ashworth Hall like a cold wind, tall, sharp-eyed, wrapped in silk and certainty. She took control of the house within hours, rearranging schedules, criticizing meals, reminding everyone of their place. She noticed Eleanor immediately. A maid assigned to the library was unusual. A maid who held herself like a lady was unacceptable. Lady Margaret watched, asked questions, smiled without warmth. And then she brought Lady Beatrice. Lady Beatrice was everything society approved of. Young, beautiful, wealthy, and trained from birth to charm. Her laughter filled rooms. Her presence demanded attention. She was presented as a guest but behaved like a future mistress of the house. Eleanor felt the danger instantly. The Duke was polite but distant with Beatrice. Lady Margaret was not. She praised her openly, paraded her through the halls, planned dinners and gatherings meant to force closeness. Beatrice noticed Eleanor's place near the Duke. She noticed the glances, the quiet understanding. One afternoon, she cornered Eleanor in the gallery. "You should remember who you are," Beatrice said softly, "and who you are not." Eleanor curtsied and said nothing. The pressure grew. Orders became harsher, tasks impossible, whispers louder. Eleanor endured it all. Until the night of the gathering. Music filled the great hall. Guests laughed. Wine flowed. Eleanor served silently, careful with every step. She avoided looking at the Duke, but she felt him watching. Beatrice approached with a smile too sharp to trust. She took a glass, then struck the tray. Wine spilled, glass shattered. Gasps filled the room. "Clumsy girl," Beatrice said loudly. Shame burned through Eleanor, but she stood still. Before punishment could fall, the Duke spoke. His voice cut through the room like steel. He examined the floor, the glass, the stains. Then he looked at Beatrice. "This was no accident," he said. Silence followed. Beatrice denied it. Lady Margaret protested. The Duke did not waver. "She will leave tonight," he said. The room froze. Beatrice's mask cracked. Lady Margaret stared in disbelief. Eleanor felt the ground shift beneath her feet. That night, the Duke found Eleanor in the library. Firelight softened his face. His anger faded into resolve. "I will not let anyone harm you," he said. She tried to protest. He stopped her with a raised hand. "I know what this means," he continued. "I know what the world will say, but I am done living by fear." He took her hand. In that quiet room, with books watching like witnesses, he asked her to trust him, and she did. When he spoke of love, it was not loud or dramatic. It was honest. Heavy with risk, Eleanor felt terror and hope rise together. She loved him. That truth could no longer be denied. But love was not enough to protect them from what was coming. Lady Margaret would not forgive this. Society would not forget, and secrets, once stirred, had a way of rising to the surface. As winter deepened and snow covered Ashworth Hall, Eleanor knew that the choice she had made by picking up that coin had led her here, and soon she would have to choose again, between love and safety, between truth and survival, between kneeling and standing tall. The cost of that choice would change everything. Winter tightened its hold on Ashworth Hall, and with it came judgment. Lady Margaret did not speak to Eleanor after Lady Beatrice was sent away. She did not need to. Her silence was sharp enough. Doors closed more often. Conversation stopped when Eleanor entered a room. The house felt divided, pulled between loyalty and fear. The Duke felt it too. He grew quieter, more thoughtful, spending long hours in the library with Eleanor, sometimes speaking, sometimes not. Their love did not grow louder. It grew steadier, stronger, as if both of them understood that what they had would soon be tested. One evening, as snow fell thick against the windows, Lady Margaret summoned the Duke to her sitting room. Eleanor did not hear the words, but she saw the tension in his shoulders when he returned. "She knows," he said later, standing by the fire in the library, "or enough of it." Eleanor's heart tightened. "About me?" "About us," he replied. "And she will not stop." The next morning, a letter arrived. An invitation, or rather a command. The Duke was expected in Boston for the spring season. Lady Margaret had arranged it carefully. Appearances, dinners, introductions. A chance, she claimed, to restore his place in society. "And Lady Beatrice?" Eleanor asked quietly. "She will be there," he said, "or someone like her." The meaning was clear. That night, the Duke made his choice. "I will not go without you," he told Eleanor. "And I will not pretend." Eleanor felt fear rise like a wave. "The world will tear us apart." "Then let it try," he said. "I have lost enough years already." The announcement came days later. The Duke intended to marry. Lady Margaret expected celebration. Instead, she received defiance. When he told her the truth, her face hardened into disbelief, then fury. She called Eleanor a manipulator, a fortune hunter, a disgrace. She warned her brother of ruin and scandal. He listened. Then he said calmly, "I choose her." Lady Margaret left Ashworth Hall that same day. The wedding was small and quiet. No society guests, no grand display. Only the household staff, who had watched Eleanor work beside them, who had seen the Duke change, who understood more than the world ever would. Eleanor wore a simple dress. Her hands trembled as she walked down the chapel aisle. When she reached him, he smiled, and the fear eased. They spoke their vows without hesitation. When the ring touched her finger, Eleanor felt something settle inside her. Not triumph, not relief. Belonging. The scandal followed quickly. Letters stopped arriving. Invitations vanished. Friends disappeared. Newspapers whispered cruel versions of the truth. The Duke answered none of it. Ashworth Hall became their refuge. Life there changed slowly. Eleanor learned to manage the estate. She earned respect not through title, but through fairness. The servants followed her willingly, remembering the girl who had once stood among them. The Duke changed too. He laughed more, slept better. The shadows in his eyes faded, not entirely, but enough to let light in. Years passed. Children came, a son with his father's eyes, a daughter with her mother's strength. The house filled with noise and warmth and life. Lady Margaret never truly returned. She wrote letters out of duty, not love. Eleanor learned to accept that some doors remain closed. One evening, long after the storms had passed, Eleanor sat in the library with her husband. The fire burned low. The same chair. The same room where everything had begun. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked softly. She smiled. "No," she said. "Not for a moment." She thought of the coin, the choice. The courage it took to stand when it would have been easier to kneel. Her life had begun again that day. Not with thunder, but with a quiet sound on marble. And a decision to be honest, no matter the cost.